Welcome to Stuck, Time to Improv. I'm Mary Scott with Business Riff, and I want startups to be wildly successful. You got to get your legal ducks in a row here, gang. So today we have Willis from Accelerate Law, and we're going to talk about some basic things you need to know in the legal area if you're a startup. Thanks for coming, Will.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So what's one of the first things startups need to consider from a legal standpoint?
Getting formed and making sure that they have personal liability protection. Because a lot of the times, whenever you form a business or you're even thinking about forming a business, folks aren't really thinking about what's going to happen when they, get a business loan or they have some sort of creditors that they're working with, right? If something goes awry, you want to make sure that down the road, people aren't able to come for your personal assets. So it's important to make sure that you have an LLC, a corporation, a nonprofit, something like that, to ensure there's a divide between your personal stuff and then the things that your business is going to end up acquiring.
Do you want to talk about what's the difference between LLC and S Corp and those kinds of things?
Sure. A lot of the times folks end up going with an LLC just as the de facto, limitation of liability company, right? But you can also get that same sort of thing through a corporation. And a corporation has a bit more formalities to it. And if you work with investors or something like that, they tend to prefer working with corporations, or at least that's what I've been told over the years, just because of the consistency in terms of the law. So there's a lot more stringent rules and requirements that you have to go through with corporations. There's a bit more flexibility with LLCs. So yeah, LLCs tend to be the easier one for people who are just going out on their own. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the right choice for everybody.
Do you need a lawyer or an accountant to set up your company?
Not necessarily, but it can make it a little bit easier, just so that way you know what you're doing. The main things that you need to do whenever you're getting an LLC is file with the Secretary of State. Make sure that you've got your federal EIN, and then if it's applicable, your state tax ID as well. And the big one that a lot of folks either miss or they don't necessarily have a great template for it is an operating agreement. And that one's not as strict of a thing if you're just a solo member LLC. But what can cause problems down the road is if you have multiple members who are working together. So you want to make sure that if you have more than one member, that you guys work together on creating that operating agreement. So that way you can avoid future fights, right? You want to make sure you've got something in there about how you'll handle disputes. If something comes together and you got two members, each of you have 50-50 ownership of the company, how do you decide when you guys see things differently? So it's important that you have some sort of a tiebreaker in an event like that. That how dividends are going to end up coming out if you're working with a corporation. Does it go in, whoever paid in the most upfront is what those percentages are going to come out as, things like that. So it's important that you have your documents in a row when you're first getting started. That way you can avoid issues down the road.
And working with a lawyer or an accountant on setting up your company is a good way to start that relationship, because you're going to need somebody in those particular roles eventually down the line, particularly if your business grows, right?
Exactly. And, as much as I'd like to say how important an attorney is, I would think that an accountant is just as important, if not more important, for the types of needs that folks have when they're first getting started.
Yeah. One of my favorite sayings is that the marketing person makes you money, the accountant helps you keep most of it, and the lawyer helps prevent you from losing it.
That's a good way to put it. I like that quite a lot.
So let's talk about some of the other kinds of legal documents startups might need.
Sure.
Contracts, like between clients or between vendors, right?
Yeah. So I actually just recently did a couple of blog posts covering the different types of contracts that startups and small businesses should typically look to. The posts are called Deciphering Legalese 15 Types of Business Contracts, like vendor contracts, shareholder agreements, and then just different types of contracts too, like technology agreements. You want to make sure you've got all that right. Confidentiality contracts, especially if you've got like patents or something like that, or trade secrets. You just want to make sure that you're covering all your responsibilities, your rights, and your obligations, and doing that as clearly as you can.
And speaking of intellectual property, do you need somebody special that can do that?
Yes. If you have a patentable invention, that has to be with an attorney who specifically handles patents. You have to take a whole separate bar exam for that. It's called the patent bar. And usually you need like a science degree or something like that to be eligible to sit for it. So there are less patent attorneys in the St. Louis region than there are folks who handle trademarks and copyrights and things like that. I happen to know a few of them. I'm happy to direct anyone who needs those services if ever they need that sort of assistance. But in terms of trademarks and copyrights, yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing that I handle on the copyright side of things, getting those registrations, helping folks license those rights, make sure that you know what your ownership entails and what you can, give away to other people and let them use.
What kind of questions should a startup ask themselves if they're thinking about going for a trademark?
Well, I guess the main one is when is the right time for me to get a trademark, right? Because there tend to be two schools of thought, and as an attorney, it's my job to be risk averse. So my thought is, as soon as you register the business and you use that mark in commerce, that's kind of when you want to be making sure that folks don't take that trademark out from under, right? On the flip side of things, what ends up happening a lot of the times is shortly before or while you're scaling your business. So instead of getting it as soon as you form the business, you might end up saying, okay, I'm ready to turn this into a franchise. I'm ready to go into different states. I don't just need protection in Missouri now, I need to go out. But the thing is, if your mark has already gained some pretty sizable traction, other folks in other states might have seen that and try to take advantage of your goodwill. So it's all about risk aversion and how willing you are to be risky, but admittedly, trademarks cost quite a bit. They do have some fees associated with them through the federal government, United States Patent and Trademark Office, or the USPTO. Those can be pretty pricey, but if you work with an attorney who's willing to have like payment plans and things like that, it can help deal with those costs.
Okay. And generally speaking, a ballpark number, how much should a startup budget for legal services in the first year?
And the startups that I've worked with, they tend to work somewhere in the 2,500 to $3,000 range. So at a minimum, that's what I'd look at. And that's not including necessarily some additional contract work, but just getting started, that's getting a solo member LLC, getting a trademark or two under your belt. Because again, those trademarks, you got your word mark just for the name of your business. And you've got a design mark oftentimes for your logo as well. And you kind of want to file those simultaneously. My firm happens to do a deal where if you do one trademark for a word mark, you also get the design mark at a discounted rate. So other attorneys might do that as well. But yeah, when you're doing all those things together, you can see about bundling some of those services, and it makes the cost go down quite a bit.
Sounds good. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Will Willis from Accelerate Law. Do you have any parting thoughts for our viewers?
Yeah. So I appreciate the fact that you had me on, first and foremost. Thank you very much for your time. And if anybody ever has any questions about, dealing with contracts, getting their business formed, either registering or licensing their intellectual property, or my specific niche is I spent the last 2 years working with the government. I worked with the city of St. Louis. So if ever anyone has any trouble dealing with, getting licenses or permits or anything like that, I'm happy to assist with that. My firm's name is Accelerate Law STL, and my website is www.alawstl.com.
Great. Thank you so much. This is Mary Scott with Business Riff. I want startups to be wildly successful. So one of the best things you can do is book a synergy call with me at businessriff.com. And join us again next time for Stuck, Time to Improv.